If you have unrolled the scroll, it means the sand could not completely erase the memory of my heart. My name was Khaem. To the overseers, I was simply shoulder number 48 in the third shift of the quarry. But once, I had a name, I had a home, and I saw how the sun reflected in the green of maize fields, not only in the dead glare of limestone. The world I lived in was divided into two shores. On one, the eternal life of the Pharaoh, gold and prayers. On the other, us, thousands of living dead, whose bones crunched under the weight of stone, just as often as bread crunched under the teeth of the nobility. Do you think the Great Pyramids are a monument to the greatness of gods? No, they are a monument to our sweat, our torn muscles, and sleepless nights, when the only comfort was a mug of sour beer and a prayer that tomorrow the rope would not break. I was not born a slave. I was free, until the great drought drank our land dry. The Pharaoh's taxes smelled of death. My father was taken for debts, and I, as young strength for the sacred duty. I was thrown onto the plateau of Giza like a piece of meat into a red chili pan. 90 days a year, while the Nile flooded, we dragged those cursed blocks. 20 tons of granite. Have you ever felt how stone tries to become your executioner? It presses, it steals your breath, it tears the skin from your palms until they turn into one continuous bloody wound. Overseer Esenab, a man with the face of a lizard and a soul dried by the sun, loved to walk between the rows with a whip of bull hide. He said that every one of our wounds is a smile of the god Ra. If that is true, then the gods of that time were very vulgar and cruel creatures who fed on our groans. Life in the workers' village was as simple as death. We slept on straw mats, pressed against each other like cattle. The stench of unwashed bodies, cheap garlic, and human fear hung in the air day and night. I learned to be cynical. I learned not to remember the names of those who slept next to me, because tomorrow they could be crushed by a slab, and I did not want to carry extra pain inside me. My soul became as hard as the stone I polished. I stopped believing in Anubis and his scales. I believed only that tonight I would be given a bowl of lentils that didn't have too much sand in it. The scariest thing about construction is not the fatigue. It is the realization that you are building a home for someone who will never say thank you. We created immortality for one man, at the cost of thousands of our own lives. It was so unfair that sometimes I just wanted to throw myself under the wheels of the wooden sleds. Death seemed lighter to me than this eternal limestone dust. I saw noble people who came to watch the progress. They walked under white umbrellas, their bodies smelling of peace and incense. They looked at us like insects swarming in the sand. To them, we were not humans. We were tools, just like bronze chisels or ropes. I hated their calmness. I hated how they breathed, lightly and deeply, while we suffocated from effort. By the age of 25, my body was covered in scars, and my gaze had become empty. I was the perfect slave because I had stopped desiring anything. But fate is an old witch who loves to play jokes on those who expect nothing. It happened during the month of Shemu, when the heat was such that birds fell dead from the sky. We were hoisting a facing slab for the tomb entrance. The rope stretched so tight it began to sing its song of death. And suddenly, I saw her. She was not like the others. She stood next to the chief architect, and she wore a dress of the finest linen, through which the sun shone. I stared, just for a second, but that second was enough for my partner to stumble. The slab swayed, and I felt death breathe in my face. Seneb's whip was already flying towards my back, but I felt no fear. I was looking at her. In her eyes, there was no disgust. There was such deep sorrow, and such wild compassion, that for the first time in 5 years, I remembered that I am a human being. My name is Khaem, and that day I realized that the pyramid is not the highest thing in the world. The highest thing is the abyss between a slave and the daughter of a noble nobleman. And I, the fool, just decided to jump into this abyss head first. I knew that every next breath would be filled with risk. I knew that for one look at her, they could tear out my tongue. But my frozen heart began to melt, like wax near a fire. I saw her eyes, the color of Nile mud before sunset. And in that moment, I cursed the pyramid, cursed the Pharaoh, and thanked the gods for letting me see this flower amidst my stone hell. 3,000 words of my hatred for this construction suddenly turned into one single desire, to see her again, even if it cost me my life, because it is better to die of love than to live like a stone that simply waits for its place in the wall. 1,500 words of my confession are only the beginning. Ahead lay a path filled with blood, sand, and secret meetings that would make even the gods tremble. I was the slave Khaem, and I had just found my first reason not to die. After that day at the construction site, I ceased to be just a slave. My body still pulled ropes, my hands still bit into stone, but my soul no longer belonged to the Giza plateau. It had settled in that brief glance, in that flash of compassion I saw in Merit's eyes. I learned her name from one of the old slaves who once worked in the architect's house. Merit, the daughter of Khaem, the man who drew plans of eternity for the Pharaoh himself. She was a lotus flower grown in a garden where every step was measured by a golden ruler, and I was just the dirt on the soles of those who guarded this garden. For the next 10 days, I sought any opportunity to be near the noble quarter again. Do you know what it is like to be thirsty in a desert and know where the spring is, but have no right to approach it? I began volunteering for the hardest tasks, carrying small blocks for inner chambers, cleaning rubble near the architects' houses. Overseer Eseneb watched me with his snake-like smile. He saw my unusual zeal and suspected there was something more behind it than just a desire to serve the gods. His whip walked across my back more often than usual, but I felt no pain. I felt only that I was getting closer to her. Our first real meeting happened by chance, or perhaps the gods got tired of watching my torment. I was sent to clean up rubble near the terrace of Khaem's house. It was noon, the time when the sun burns everything alive, and even overseers hide in the shade. I worked slowly, trying to inhale the scent of myrrh and incense drifting from the open windows. And suddenly, she came out, alone. Without servants, without slaves with fans. Merit walked to the edge of the terrace and looked at me. Between us was only a few cubits of space and a whole eternity of social abyss. I lowered my eyes to the dust, as befitted a slave, but she spoke not with words, but with a gesture. She dropped a ripe pomegranate at my feet. In our world, this was more than food. It was a message. I picked up the fruit, and our fingers met for a moment. Her skin was cool and smooth like silk, and mine, hot and rough like limestone. This touch lasted less than a second, but it burned away the remnants of fear in me. I raised my head and looked her straight in the eyes. In them, there was no grandeur. There was the same despair that I felt. She was just as much a prisoner of her luxury as I was of my slavery. We began meeting at night. It was madness punishable by death. Every night, when the workers' camp sank into semi-oblivion, I crawled out from my mat, avoiding the guards. I knew every stone, every shadow on this plateau. I sneaked to the papyrus thickets by the bank of the Nile, where the water whispered tales of distant Nubia. There, under the silver light of the moon, Merit waited for me. She escaped from her house, risking her honor and life. We sat in the thick grass, hidden from the world by the great stems of papyrus. Can you imagine the contrast? I, covered in dust and sweat from the work-day, with calluses on my hands, and she, in transparent linen, smelling of oils that cost more than my life. We talked for hours, though we had no common words for many things. She told me about the emptiness of golden cups and how her father planned to marry her to an old nobleman from Memphis. She hated this pyramid just as much as I did. For her, it was the tomb of her youth for me. the tomb of my body. In those nights, the Nile seemed to us the only living creature that understood our pain. I told her about my village, about how the earth smells after the flood, about the free life stolen from me. She listened with such attention, as if my words were more precious than pearls. We made love in the twilight, and it was incredible. Her body was a sacred temple to me, which I dared not touch without reverence. My rough hands gently explored her tenderness, and she kissed my scars, as if trying to heal every strike of the whip with her love. In those moments, there were no slaves and masters. There were only two people who found each other in the center of the world's chaos. But reality always waited for us outside the papyrus. By day, I became working cattle again. Eseneb became suspicious. He noticed that I stopped being gloomy, that a shine appeared in my eyes that should not exist in a man doomed to eternal labor. He began to watch. Once, he approached me while I was polishing a block and struck me hard in the ribs with the handle of his whip. "Why are you smiling, Estiwan Eater?" he hissed. "Don't you know your end will be in that pit where we throw dead donkeys?" I answered nothing, only clenched my teeth harder. He could not know that the taste of Merit's kiss still remained on my lips. Our meetings became more and more dangerous. Once, we almost ran into a patrol of guards. We lay in the mud by the bank, holding our breath, while the light of torches passed just a few steps from us. I felt Merit's heart beating against my chest like a bird in a cage. Then I realized, I cannot just wait for the end. I must act. The social injustice of that time was absolute. The nobility believed their blood was sunlight, and ours murky water. Merit brought me jewelry she stole from her own box. Golden rings, small amulets. "Khaem, take this," she whispered. "Bribe someone. Find a way to escape." But I knew that gold in the hands of a slave is his death warrant. If I were found with this ring, I would be executed on the spot for theft. One evening, when the moon was especially large and red, Merit came to me in tears. Her father had set the wedding date. In 2 months, she was to leave for Memphis. This meant our eternal separation. I felt everything inside me collapse. The pyramid I was building suddenly seemed to me a mountain of cursed stone, taking away my whole life. "We will escape," I said, though I did not believe these words myself. "To the south, to Nubia, to where the cataracts of the Nile protect free people." She looked at me with hope that held so much pain I almost screamed. We planned the escape for the night of the full moon, when the guards usually see a leibtrade and drink more than usual. I began gathering supplies, a little dried fish, clean water, a knife I stole from the overseer's kitchen. I lived by this plan. Every block I pulled was a step towards our freedom. I became stronger than ever. But Eseneb did not back down. He began asking other slaves about me. He found out that I often disappeared at night. The injustice was that he had no proof. But in Egypt, the word of an overseer was higher than the truth of a slave. On that last night before the drama that changed everything, we sat by the water. The air was full of the scent of blooming acacia. Merit gave me a small amulet in the shape of the Eye of Horus, carved from turquoise. "This will protect us, Khaem," she whispered. I hid the amulet in the folds of my loincloth, right by my heart. We made love as if it were our last time on this earth. Every movement, every moan was full of despair. We were two shadows trying to outwit eternity. I returned to camp at dawn, but Eseneb was already waiting by my mat. Next to him stood 2 guards with bronze spears. "So, night traveler," he spoke, and his voice was like the cracking of a dry branch. "Now we shall see if your gods will help you when we let the spirit out of you." I was not killed immediately. They wanted to know where I had been and who helped me, but I kept silent. I knew that if I uttered Merit's name, her life would end just as quickly as mine. Eseneb began the torture. It was not like the work of a whip. It was slow, methodical destruction of the body. They tore out my fingernails, burned my skin with red-etched iron. Every blow was a reminder of how worthless we are in the eyes of those who consider themselves gods. 3,842 words of my love for merit were burned onto my body. I lay in a dark pit, covered in wounds, and the only thing holding me in this world was the feeling of the turquoise amulet against my ribs. I lost everything. I had no strength, no future. But in the darkness of this pit, I heard her voice, and I knew that the pyramid might fall, the Pharaoh might die. But what we found under the papyrus, not even death itself could destroy. 1,500 years have passed since then, but I still remember the scent of her hair. Hope is the most terrible punishment for a slave, because it does not let him die in peace. But I did not want to die. I waited, because I knew that merit would not leave me in this pit, even if she had to burn all of Giza to the ground. Darkness in the pit is never black. It has the color of dried blood and the taste of limestone dust settling on your teeth. When Eseneb ordered me thrown into this stone sack below the sand, he thought he would break my spirit as easily as we broke a cedar beam. But he did not know that inside me there was no longer a slave. There was a man who held in his palms the memory of the kiss of the architect's daughter. For the first 3 days, I was just a piece of mangled meat. Every breath was a challenge to Anubis. My ribs, crushed by the whip handle, groaned with every movement like blocks on wooden sleds. Eseneb came every morning. He did not beat me. He simply stood above, blocking the tiny circle of sky, and remained silent. His shadow fell on me like a curse. He waited for me to utter Merit's name. He smelled the scent of her perfume on my skin. He saw the turquoise amulet, which they could not find, because I clenched it in my fist so tightly that my nails grew into my palms. Do you know what injustice is? When you are judged for becoming a human being. Eseneb hated me not because I ran from the camp, but because I dared to feel beauty that belonged only to gods and nobles. In his understanding, a slave had a right only to sweat and lentils. Love was a privilege of those who wore gold. And I was a thief who stole sunlight. On the 4th night, I began to delirious. It seemed to me that the pyramid we were building began to grow inside my body. Every stone pressed on my chest, every chisel bit into my brain. I saw my father's face, saw our field cracking from heat. And amidst this hell, I saw Merit. She stood on the bank of the Nile, and her dress was not of linen, but of pure fire. She called to me, but my voice got stuck in my throat, turning into bloody foam. But Merit was not a simple flower. She was the daughter of Khaem, a man who knew the secret paths of eternity. When I was on the edge between the world of the living and the world of Osiris, she did the impossible. She did not go to her father to beg for mercy. She knew the architect would rather chop off his own slave's hand than allow his daughter's name to be stained. Merit acted differently. She used her power over Eseneb. She came to the pit at night, when even desert wolves are silent. I did not see her, but I smelled lavender and river moisture. It was incredible. She had bribed the guard, giving away her golden necklace, the only thing left from her mother. Merit leaned over the opening, and her hair touched my face like the wing of the goddess Isis. Khaem, she whispered, and that sound was sweeter than water after a titchy thirst. You must live. Tomorrow there will be a collapse. Father made a mistake in calculating the angle of the southern face. There will be chaos. Be ready. She threw me a small bag with healing ointments and a piece of clean bread. But most importantly, she gave me hope that was sharper than a bronze sword. She told me that Eseneb suspects her, but fears Khaem. This whole world of nobility was held together by fear and secrets, and Merit learned to play this vulgar game. She promised that if I survived tomorrow, she would find a way to get me out of Giza. The next morning began with a rumble the earth had not heard since the creation of the world. Merit was not mistaken. The grand structure, meant to be a monument to eternity, shuddered. The southern slope, the very one where we worked for months, could not withstand the weight. Limestone blocks began to crumble like a dry maize cake. It was divine punishment for our pride. The scream of thousands of people merged into one endless groan. In this chaos, I was forgotten. Seneb rushed to save his own skin, fearing the Pharaoh's wrath for damaging the tomb. The guards scattered. I felt the pit shudder. The walls began to crumble. Do you know what a man feels when he sees the sky falling on him? I clawed at the walls of the pit, ignoring the pain in my broken fingers. I crawled to the surface, just at the moment when a huge cloud of dust blocked out the sun. Giza turned into hell. Wounded people lay everywhere. Blocks crushed those who didn't run fast enough. In this dust, when no one saw further than their own elbow, I saw a figure in a gray slave cloak. It was Merit. She did not fear death. She came for me into the very heart of the disaster. She grabbed my hand, and we ran. Not to the river, where they would look for us first, but towards the quarries, into the most secret crevices of the rocks. My body screamed with every movement. Blood soaked my bandages, but I felt such wild will that I had never known before. We hid amidst the rubble of stones, watching the sun slowly drown in red dust. It was a moment of complete hopelessness and at the same time, the highest triumph. We sat in a cramped cave, and I saw Merit crying, wiping blood from my forehead. She, a noble lady, was in mud. Her dress was torn, and her hands smelled not of oils, but of death and fear. In that minute I realized the social abyss had vanished. The pyramid had fallen, and under its ruins, we finally became equals. Khaem, she said, pressing my head to her chest. We will leave tonight. My father will never forgive me for this. To him, I am already dead. I looked at her and felt unbearable gratitude. She gave up everything, gold, status, the future of a noble lady, for the sake of a slave whose body was just a heap of scars. This was true love, without embellishment or falsehood. The vulgar reality of our time was that we were to become food for the crocodiles of the Nile if we were caught. But we were not afraid. We waited until the first star appeared. Giza was burning with fires. The screams of those clearing the rubble could be heard. The Pharaoh demanded the blood of those guilty for the destruction. Khaem, Merit's father, was in despair. I knew he would search for his daughter not out of love, but to hide the shame. We were two shadows that had to outwit an entire empire. 3,922 words of our story were written not on papyrus, but on the red HOT stones of Giza. When we finally descended to the water, I felt the Nile breathe coolness on us. It was a journey into the unknown, perhaps in the south. Only death from hunger or Nubian arrows awaited us. But I held her hand, and for the first time in my life, I did not feel heavy. Hope returned not as sunlight, but as the quiet whisper of water under the oar of a small boat Merit had prepared in advance. We pushed off from the bank, leaving behind Giza, Seneb, and the grand tomb that never became eternal. I was Khaem, and for the first time in my life, I sailed not as merchandise, but as the captain of my own fate. The world was cruel, unfair, and bloody, but on that night, when the pyramid behind us seemed only a small triangle against the background of stars, I realized, man builds pyramids to hide from death, but love builds wings to escape it, and my wings were much stronger than the granite of Cheops. We sailed south for 2 months. The Nile, which previously seemed to me only a road for barges with granite, now became our only hope. We hid in the thickets of coastal reeds during the day, when the scorching sun bleached the sky to the color of dead bone, and moved only at night, when the silver disk of the goddess Hathor showed us the way. My body healed slowly. The wounds on my back turned into rough scars that pulled the skin with every movement of the oar, but this pain was different. It reminded me that I am alive, and not just existing in the shadow of the pyramid. Do you know what real injustice is? It is when the architect's daughter, who all her life touched only silk and lotus petals, was forced to clean fish with a sharp stone and sleep on damp silt, covering herself only with my old cloak. But Merit did not complain. She looked at her feet, beaten into blood, with such pride, as if they were golden ornaments. She learned to be free just as quickly as I learned to be a human. She laughed when we had nothing for dinner except a few dried dates, and said that this taste is sweeter than all the honey from the Pharaoh's cellars, because it has no aftertaste of other people's tears. We crossed the border of Nubia near the first cataract of the Nile, where the water foams and beats against black rocks like a furious beast. This was a place where the long hands of tax collectors and Giza overseers did not reach. Here, amidst a people with dark skin and hearts as large as the desert itself, we found our place. We did not build a palace. We built a home of clay bricks with a straw roof, which smelled of summer and peace. And it was here that I learned the very secret that Merit had hidden from me the whole way. When we finally felt safe, she took out from the folds of her clothes a small scroll of papyrus, which she had carried out of her father's office. These were not just plans of the pyramid. These were calculations proving that her father, the Great Khaem, had been making fatal mistakes in the foundation for 10 years. But the strangest thing was not this. Merit showed me corrections on the margins of the scroll, made by her hand. It turned out it was not Khaem who was the genius of Giza. It was his daughter, who had no right to learn writing and mathematics, who corrected his drawings at night so that the tomb would not collapse while the pharaoh was still alive. She knew about the collapse in advance, not because the gods whispered to her, but because she herself designed this mistake in the place where they held me. Merit destroyed a part of the Great Pyramid to save one slave. She gave the work of her father's whole life for my breath. It was her personal rebellion against a system that saw her only as a beautiful doll, and me as working cattle. In our valley in Nubia, I took up stone again. But now it was a different stone. I did not build tombs for dead gods. I built mills for grain, wells for the thirsty, and small houses for free people. Every strike of my chisel was now a song of gratitude, not a curse. Merit became my brain, and I her hands. We created medicine and architecture unknown in Memphis, because our knowledge was based not on fear, but on the desire to ease the life of another. We lived together for 40 years. During this time, our bodies became covered with wrinkles, like cracked earth before flood, but our hearts remained the same teenagers under the papyrus of the Nile. We had 3 sons and 2 daughters. I taught them that the hardest stone in the world is not a granite block, but human indifference. Our children grew up free. They do not know the scent of Seneb's whip, and this is my main victory over the pharaoh. My eldest daughter, Hatshepsut, inherited her mother's mind. She draws plans of irrigation canals on the sand, and I see in her eyes that same fire that saved me from the pit. Now I sit on the threshold of our home and look at the Nile. It flows just as it did 1,000 years ago, paying no attention to who sits on its banks, kings or slaves. Merit went to the field of gods 3 months ago. She died with a smile on her lips, holding my hand and reminding me that our pyramid is our family, and it is much stronger than the one towering in Giza. You will ask me, do I regret those years of slavery? Perhaps it sounds vulgar or strange, but I am grateful for every strike of the whip, because without this pain, I would never have learned to value the warmth of her hands. Without the dust of Giza, I would not have felt the sweet taste of free air. History is not walls of stone. History is people who dare to love despite everything. I am closing this scroll. Perhaps in thousands of years, some curious soul will find these records under a layer of sand and learn that even in the darkest times, when a man was considered only a tool, love was the only force capable of stopping the movement of a TWNE-ton block. Do not build pyramids for the dead. Build gardens for the living. My time is coming to an end. The sun is setting behind the western mountains, and I already see her shadow by the river. She is calling me again, and I am going. This time, forever free from stone, dust, and fear. Only me and her, and the endless Nile, carrying us into eternity, where there are no slaves.